Heights as an Israeli territory and creating a so-called peace plan without any Palestinian participation and input. Like, there is no other time in the world. There is no other place. There is no other, like, logical situation where that would be considered okay. Like, the international community, it's really horrifying, views the Palestinians as second-class citizens. They view them as animals. They view them as dirt, rat, like whatever you want to call them. And it's proven completely true. Like, look at what the biggest force out there is. Look at how they're handling this. The United States, led by Donald Trump, refusing to include the Palestinians on their own peace deal, the thing that determines their own, like, life. It determines their own conditions. Like, it is ridiculous and obscene. The dehumanization, the just manipulation and degradation that the Palestinians have suffered, especially in the last 3 years, but really for a very, very long time. So, yeah, while no U.S. administration has successfully brokered a resolution to the Israel's now 53-year-long occupation, the Trump years have been explicitly detrimental to the Palestinian cause. Palestinian leader Hanan Ashrawi wrote on Twitter that with this deal, Israel got rewarded for not declaring openly what it's been doing to Palestine illegally and persistently since the beginning of the occupation. Because that's the most frustrating thing. They've been doing this for years now. Like, it is ridiculous. It's horrible. So indeed, with Donald Trump at the helm and son-in-law Jared Kushner as the primary strategist, even concessions for Palestinians have been done away with. To add insult to injury, while the deal has been couched in terms of a commitment by Israel to suspend annexation of Palestinian territories, in his Israeli press conference announcing the deal, Netanyahu said annexation was still on the table and that it was something he was, quote, committed to. And it doesn't look like, the good news is it doesn't look like Netanyahu will be around much longer, but the bad news is Benny Gantz, the guy who could be taking his place, is not much better in any way. So, yeah, that's a very, very important thing to recognize there, because, yeah, like, the right, the most quote unquote left wing option in Israel is still a very right wing option, because the inherent project of that state, which is to create a pretty much an ethno state, like a state for one group of people and one group of people only, like, that's not a left-wing project. Like, it's very, very hard to look at what Israel is and what they're trying to do, the very point of their existence, and to extract quote-unquote left-wing values from that. Like, it's not going to happen. So the left-wing there is not very left, shall we say. But, yeah, it is really kind of ridiculous. Among the most brutal aspects of this period for Palestinians have been the loss of support for their cause in neighboring Arab states. The Arab political party in Israel, Balad, said that by signing this pact, the UAE has officially joined Israel against Palestine and placed itself in the camp of the enemies of the Palestinian people. The UAE has previously held a position consistent with public opinion in the Gulf and Middle East countries that the acceptance of a formal diplomatic relations with Israel should only take place in exchange for a just peace in accordance with international law. Back in June, Emirati ambassador to the U.S., Youssef Al-Otsabia, penned an op-ed in the Yediot Aronot newspaper, the Israeli equivalent to USA Today, appealing directly in Hebrew for Israel not to annex the West Bank. However, by working on an agreement with Trump and Netanyahu to normalize relations, the country has now made itself Israel's partner in cementing de facto annexation and ongoing apartheid. So really what it is they saw the opportunity. They saw the opportunity to make unites with the U.S., and honestly, you can't really blame them for that. Like, if you're a smaller country, I mean, you've seen what the U.S. has done, especially in that region. You do not want to get on their bad side. Like, it is in your interest as a country, especially, less and less now, given the fact that the U.S. is weakening across the board in terms of empire and in military strength. Like, but still, you still don't want to, like, play games with the United States in terms of things in the military projects that they're capable of and willing to do. But yeah, so Secretary Pompeo has defended the UAE from credible reports the U.S. sold weapons to UAE to the UAE that have been transferred in Yemen to groups linked to Al-Qaeda, hardline Salafi militias, and Yemeni separatists. The UAE was also stung by revelations of secret prisons it had been operating in Yemen, where prisoners were subjected to horrific forms of torture, including The grill, where victims are tied to a spit like a roast and spun in a circle of fire. In Libya, the UAE has been criticized for violating a 2011 UN Security Council arms embargo by supplying combat equipment to the LAAF, the armed group commanded by General Khalifa Haftar, with a well-established record of human rights abuses. So the deal really with Israel gives the UAE a much-needed veneer of respectability. And get on the U.S.'s good side to get themselves past all these, shall we say, unpleasant allegations and get themselves kind of on the right side of history, which is aligning yourself with the U.S., aligning yourself with apartheid, and turning your back on Palestinians. So, yeah, it is impossible to understand the impetus for this deal without putting it in the context of the ongoing hostilities between all three countries and Iran. Following the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, in recent years, Israel has been negotiating with various Gulf states, including the UAE, to push back against Iran's growing influence in the region. As the communique announcing the Israel-UAE deal asserted, the communication, I guess you could say, the U.S., Israel, and the UAE share a similar outlook to regarding threats in the region. So that is a hint at Iran. This dovetails with Trump's anti-Iran obsession, which includes withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal and his, quote, maximum pressure, unquote, campaign designed to force Iran back to the negotiating table to make, quote, a better deal. Like, that's going to work. In announcing the UAE-Israel pact, Trump declared with ridiculous bravado that if he wins the election, he'll have a new deal with Iran within 30 days. Anyone who believes this must be almost as delusional as Trump. The deal that anybody would do a deal with the United States, the idea that someone would do a deal with Donald Trump is just absolutely insane to me. So the fact that this agreement between two Middle Eastern countries was first announced thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C., shows how it is more about shoring up Trump's slumping electoral campaign and improving Netanyahu's battered image in Israel than bringing peace to the Middle East. I mean, when has it ever actually been about bringing peace to the Middle East? That's a real question. It's always about some other external interest that just screws people, like the Palestinians in this case. It also shows that Netanyahu and bin Zayed have a stake in seeing Trump win a second term in the White House. Instead of pointing out the hollowness of the pact, Joe Biden's response was unfortunately to congratulate Israel and the UAE and try to take credit for the deal. I personally spent time with leaders of both Israel and the UAE during our administration, building the case for cooperation and broader engagement. I'm gratified by today's announcement. So, yeah, this is just like, in some ways, even more pathetic than Donald Trump. The normalization of relations between the UAE, Israel, facilitated by the U.S., serves to prop up three repressive leaders, Trump, Netanyahu, and bin Zayed, and will cause further harm to Palestinians. It is both a shame and a sham. So, yeah, that piece there was by Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Global Exchange and Code Pink. Women for Peace is the author of the new book, Inside Iran, The Real History of the Politics of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Her previous books include Kingdom of the Unjust, Drone Warfare, and A Honduran Woman Speaks from the Heart with Jody Evans, Stop the Next War, now Inner Ocean Action Guide. So, and Ariel Gold also wrote that she's the national co-director for GoPink as well. She manages the organization's campaign for Palestinian rights. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for listening to programming from the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. It really means a lot. So if you like what you're hearing, please consider supporting us by checking out our merch store available on Spreaker.com/TSWS. The link for it is there. Also, if you like what you're hearing, feel free to leave us a review on wherever or however you listen. You can do it on Spreaker by leaving a positive comment, and of course on iTunes by rating and reviewing us 5 stars, and on whatever possible program or site that you listen to SWRN on, leave a nice review, leave a good comment, let us know your feedback, and also if it's negative too, I always welcome constructive feedback. Thank you so much for listening, and now let's get back to your show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a really, really fun little bit for you, some hype for you. Yeah, so Senator Ed Markey won applause from progressives overnight and into Friday after releasing a campaign ad touting himself as an outspoken Senate leader with working-class roots who is better positioned to serve Massachusetts than his Democratic primary challenger, Representative Joe Kennedy III. The 3-minute video, which begins with a rebuke of President Donald Trump and the Republican Party, who looked for what they could take from the American people when the coronavirus pandemic hit earlier this year, repurposing the historic phrase made by famous President John F. Kennedy, the great uncle of Markey's opponent, of course, about asking what we could do for our country. He flips that in a really, really wonderful way. So I'm just going to leave our little bit of outro. I'm going to give you an outro that is going to be this wonderful ad. So enjoy this ad. Check out, maybe consider donate, making some calls for Ed Markey. He's up pretty strongly in recent polls, but don't let that lure you into a false sense of complacency. So yeah, if you feel like you want to send a few Markey's way, definitely, I would say it's a worthwhile cause, a worthwhile endorsement. So Ed Markey with a great new ad that we will lead out with today. Thank you so much for watching Newsflash. We have Uncultured later tonight, so we'll see you then. Until then, Ed Markey for Senate, baby.
There's an invisible contract we all signed at birth. A promise. Every hour we work means longer days of freedom and security. It paved the road in your neighborhoods, and it added up to a country. But when crisis hit, Trump's government abandoned America. We asked what we could do for our country. They looked for what they could take. But there's a truth written in every history book. If you break the sacred contract, the people make a revolution. All across America, the essential people are demanding a new deal. Well, they call me the deal maker.
Ed Markey's desk was thrown out of the hall by the State House bosses. Markey's bill is now the law.
I'm Ed Markey. I'm running for Congress because I want to fight for the principles that I believe in. The bosses may tell me where to sit. No one tells me where to stand.
My father was a union leader. He taught me, don't beg for your rights, organize and take them. So in January, I was the first senator to write to Trump. I warned him we needed a plan. I talked to the Democrats and the Republicans. I told them we've got to save the fishermen. A month later, we had $300 million for our fishing industry. Trump wanted to cheap out, but I helped negotiate $600 a week for any American struggling to find their next gig. They thought the son of a milkman. I need new ones. I don't need to get on the phone and talk to lobbyists to know what working people think. I get on the streets and I listen.
I've got a question for 1 million people. Do you want to freeze the arms race?
I put the deal on the table, but the people make it impossible to refuse. With 500 laws on the books, you think I'm going to stop now? They wish.
Green New
Congresswoman
Deal.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey introduced their Green New Deal.
Stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process.
We got to absolutely crush Donald Trump in November. But if we're going to end this era of chaos, that won't be enough. We got to make sure President Biden signs the Green New Deal. We can't wait.
You've got to have folks in the United States Senate who are willing to stand up for working people. That's who Ed Markey is. I need Ed Markey in the United States Senate.
We asked what we could do for our country. We went out. We did it. With all due respect, it's time to start asking what your country can do for you.
You've just listened to Newsflash.